Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson. You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Mormon News Roundup, where Chino Blanco and Dives will ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. It's January 29th, 2023, and we've got episode 44 coming right at you. Chino Blanco is co-hosting, and let's go over what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Midnight Mormons versus Reddit. Wow, this is going to be absolutely fascinating. We have new Mormon-related Netflix series that has been announced. We'll tell you about that. There's an interesting Anchorage Temple renovation that has been announced. We'll also give you an update on the Brodie Awards and also the LDS Chosen TV series. There's a connection between the Chosen TV series about the life of Jesus and Mormons, and there's a lot of intrigue that has been stirred up. And finally, we're going to close out with the best LDS pickup lines ever. If you want to connect with us, myself and my co-host here, Chino, we're at the MormonNewsRoundup.org, or you can send us an email to collab@MormonNewsRoundup.org, or you can come on over to Our Mormon to specifically interact with Chino. So welcome, Chino, to the Mormon News Roundup.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, it's thrilled to have you on the podcast. Now, you're a big time guy. You're like the original OG over there on Reddit. How did you originally get involved with Reddit, and what's your role there?
I mean, that project is really, it's the whole disaffected Mormon underground years and years ago, before the internet even existed, really, just kind of coming to fruition. And that platform, you know, the OG was the creator of that platform. We used to hang out at a place called FLAC, Further Light and Knowledge. And he just posted on that board and said, hey, we're starting up this new thing on something called Reddit. And we headed over, and, you know, it's become what it is now.
Now, are you the moderator for Our Mormon and Our Ex-Mormon?
No. Those, you know, I had originally been a moderator at Ex-Mormon and also a moderator at Our Mormon. That is such a thankless job. They're basically unpaid janitors. And I mean, for myself, I could do it for a while, but you burn out.
Well, considering your background in cleaning church toilets and janitorial services, I think that would be a great fit for you, right? Right?
Yeah. Ex-Mormons, you know, doing more volunteer unpaid service. But in any case.
Yeah. Okay. Now you've got like 600,000 karma on Reddit. I don't think I've ever seen anyone with that much karma. Can you just explain to me how does karma work on Reddit, and why does it suck so much? I'm sorry, I just have to put that in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly important as far as how that whole platform works. It just sort of, you know, it drives that need for the dopamine hit. Mm-hmm. And so
you get karma by like giving people thumbs up and commenting and things like that. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's upvote, downvote. You know, okay. Folks on Facebook, it'd be a like button. In Reddit, it's called an upvote or a downvote.
I gotcha. Now, you know, I somehow got banned off of Our Mormon, I don't know, a couple years ago for reasons that are only known either to my stake patriarch or God. So are you able to unban me?
All right. So, I mean, in any of these subreddits, there's usually, especially, I'm going to give you a little tip. If you use the old version of Reddit, which is old.reddit.com, that gives you a little bit cleaner text interface. There's a button that says message the mods. Mm-hmm. And generally, if you just click on that, message the mods and say, hey, guys, you know, what's the deal? You'll get an answer back. In mod crews at these places, you know, Ex-Mormon's been really stable over the last decade, but a lot of these forums, the mod crews are constantly changing. So you got to hit that message the mods button.
Okay, that's definitely what. Was
it something you said, or is it just you have low karma? Or I mean, some of these forums expect you. I mean, at this point with Ex-Mormon, just to try to cut down on sort of the drive-by trolling, you have to have a minimum level of karma to participate, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think I have that. I'm like one of those lurkers, which I guess Reddit really doesn't appreciate, right?
Well, I mean, there are thousands. I mean, in Ex-Mormon's case, there are actually millions of lurkers there. So I mean, lurking's fine. It's just if you want to participate without having any sort of karma, that gets difficult.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed. So I guess I'll have to message those moderators. I'm not sure what I said or did, but They never even held the disciplinary council on me, which I thought was definitely in the terms of service. But, I didn't read those terms of service very carefully, so I'm not too sure about that. And, with the new handbook update, you actually don't get the full disciplinary council anymore, so not really sure, but I'll have to message those moderators. Now, Chino, I am in awe of you for one reason is because I kind of swim in the Mormon news. I'm considered, I consider myself a big church watcher, and I really watch the news articles. I really try to keep up on this podcast on the latest and greatest. And I have to tell you that I'm in awe of your ability to find so many good and very obscure LDS related news articles, which I find very interesting. We're not talking about church news sources here. We're talking about off the wall stuff, which is really nifty and very, very, very interesting. Now, how is it that you find these? I really want to know how you find all this stuff.
Unfortunately, it's there's no great algorithm or secret behind any of it. It's kind of a relentlessness on one hand. On the other hand, there's something called the Mormon Archipelago that I don't think anybody uses anymore. It's an aggregator for what used to be called the Bloggernacle. And so if you go to ldsblogs.org, you'll just sort of see this aggregation of all of this blogging that's still happening by common consent and wheat and tares, and a variety of Exponent 2 has their blog. And it's all laid out right there. And you just kind of scroll through and see what catches your interest. So there's that bit. I mean, I would put that out there. Anyone who wants to go to ldsblogs.org, they're going to be able to see a constantly updated aggregation of the headlines from those guys. The other thing is just using news.google. Just go to news.google.com and type in Mormon, and then you just scroll through those hits, and that's pretty much it, I think.
Yeah, very good, very good. Now that's I'm definitely going to be checking out that. I just looked it up while we were watching, and yeah, ldsblogs.org has got a lot of good stuff on there. I was definitely using the Google trick, but now I've got some more tricks in my bag, which is very, very helpful. Now, Chino, is there anything else about your personal life or religious beliefs that you'd like to share before we hop into this week's episode?
I mean, you're talking to someone who's really decades into being post-Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of inflection points, in my life. When I got back from my mission in my second year at BYU, after getting back to BYU from Brazil, just what I noticed on campus, it felt like we were entering, Armin Moss has this whole thing about retrenchment, and it felt like it was going through a period of retrenchment where the rules were coming down. So my freshman year at BYU, I actually had a really great time. I went to BYU on a debate scholarship, had a great freshman year at Helaman Halls, really enjoyed the experience, went on my mission, coming to terms with my beliefs during my mission. But, I'm one of those Expos who would say, I don't regret my mission. I really liked my mission president, ended up going to Thanksgiving dinner with him after my mission, staying in touch. But that second year coming back and you're a little bit older, you feel like you're an adult, you've had maybe some leadership responsibilities on your mission. And then you come back to campus and it felt like they were treating us like kids because they're like, oh, church attendance is required now. We're going to take roll every Sunday. And I'm like, dude, I just got done volunteering 2 years of my life for this institution and you're going to treat me like a deacon.
Yeah.
So that's just when I got back and I said, well, I'm going to, get my transfer out as easily as possible. And I have to say, I mean, I really appreciate some of the professors I had at BYU who, when I talked to them and said, I feel about like I'm going to disappoint my family here. I feel like I'm, letting people down because, in our family going to BYU, that was just is like being an Eagle Scout. You want to drive a car, you get your Eagle, you want to go to school and have your education paid for, you go to BYU, that sort of thing. And so I was just dealing with the fact that, hey, I'm going to transfer out and figure out how to fund the rest of my life because I'm not going to be getting any funding or support from my family once I do this. And some of the professors at BYU were just like, you've got to pursue your life.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate you coming onto the program, and we'll be interested to see your take on the news because you know as much about Mormon news as I think just about anybody does. But before we do that, I understand that you've got the Mormon News Roundup joke of the week.
Studying Mormon history, I learned about my forefathers and my foremothers. And in my case, it was except in my case, it was 5 mothers.
Okay.
All right. So I thought that one was that was all right. It's like, what do you? There was another one that I just ran across here. So what do you get when you cross Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses?
I do know the answer to this. I don't know what it is, but get it off of my doorstep.
Yeah, except in this case, I think it needs to be updated to be like, hey, I don't know, but only one of them are showing up in Facebook Marketplace.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah, let's update it. I don't know, but I need to block it off of my Facebook page.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, and that's part of the recent thing that's been, fun to watch is this whole Facebook phenomenon.
Yeah, okay.
But
Very,
anyway,
very well. Okay, well, we're glad to have you on the program. Now, our first news article here is the Midnight Mormons versus Reddit. So,
okay.
Kwaku in particular, he went on to the Midnight Mormons run a popular LDS YouTube channel, and they are probably best known for, I don't know, stirring up controversy and being somewhat controversial. They're definitely, I would say, slightly right of center. So they are saying here that the anti-Mormons and ex-Mormons are always talking about how they want to start a conversation in a safe environment, but they tried to start an Ask Me Anything on Reddit, which is supposedly the safest turf possible, and they were censored. What happened with this Ask Me Anything on Reddit, Chino?
Completely fabricated narrative, which seems to be par for the course with this crew. I mean, you're talking about some guys who are basically comedians and wannabe influencers, and this is what they do. They fabricate narratives and try to draw attention to themselves. So I don't know what more to say about that other than if you're going to do an AMA on Reddit, anyone who's familiar with the platform, you go to r/IAMA, and anyone who's a public figure of any note is going to, before they start the AMA, they're going to have a photo of themselves with their Reddit user handle saying, here's today's date, here's my Reddit user handle with the picture of themselves to verify that it's really who they are. The first step is you're going to post something as part of the AMA to verify your identity. The second thing is just to be courteous, you're going to give a heads up to the mods in the subreddit to let them know that you're planning to do this. Because if you don't do that, you're expecting volunteers to take time out of their day to moderate this thing, to follow along and make sure it doesn't get out of hand. That's just not very polite. And so, I mean, there's just those two things. A, they don't seem to understand how the platform works. And B, they're kind of rude to show up with a Reddit account that has no karma, no history. It's a 1 month old, Kwaku showed up with a 1 month old account that had no history on it, saying, "Hey, I'm Kwaku. Ask me anything." Well, how do we know? The famous line is on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog.
Yeah.
Right. So you're dealing with a fairly savvy audience at ex-Mormon who are internet people, and they're like, well, the first thing we need is some verification. So as far as all of that, that just seems like something they've completely fabricated on their side to draw attention to their project. It also seems like, I mean, their audience, you say they're popular, but I mean, in terms of traffic, that Reddit post, any post about Midnight Mormons on either R Mormon or RX Mormon is actually getting more eyeballs than any of their YouTube content. So I understand sort of the logic of why they're trying to antagonize Reddit. But it's not a particularly impressive or interesting topic in the sense that I don't even understand what Midnight Mormons is actually about. It doesn't seem to be about Mormonism in any particularly serious way. I mean, are they really discussing Mormonism at this point?
Well, they have a wide variety of issues that they discuss, but I think what you're saying here is that, I can't go onto Reddit and say I'm President Obama or something like that and say ask me anything and then pose as a public figure. There has to be some kind of a verification so that the ask me anything has some kind of a legitimacy, and they didn't do the necessary steps.
Well, and this is just learning how to be an adult on Reddit. I mean, the antics, because it doesn't take a very long time to think through how this would work. So what if it wasn't Kwaku? What if someone came on posing as Kwaku and said, ask me anything, and then proceeded to just make a complete ass of himself, as a kind of hit? That is the kind of trolling that happens on the internet. And by not just taking it up front as, oh, you claim to be Kwaku, so let's pretend that you are, that's actually a courtesy to Kwaku and these guys. That's a courtesy to anyone who would want to do a legitimate AMA, is expecting some verification. Would you want someone who's not you, claiming to be you, on the internet doing an AMA on Reddit? Probably not.
Only if it led to fame and fortune on my part. I can just tell you that. But,
well, I mean, the thing is, so someone who's running a Mormon News Roundup or someone like myself, you don't do this, and especially for Redditors, we don't do it because we're seeking notoriety. It is the absolute worst platform for trying to build a personal brand, right?
Absolutely.
This is an anonymous platform. It's for people to be able to freely express what's on their minds. And part of that freedom involves that anonymity. One of the problems with things like, say, Facebook, if you're talking about ex-Mormon issues, particularly, there's a lot of, emotional and, family and whatever community baggage involved in that. Do you want to be doing that as yourself on that platform? It can turn into a train wreck because you're talking about very personal things. You're talking about religion with a bunch of folks. It's much easier to do this on a platform like Reddit, where people don't really know who I am and I'm allowed to just speak freely. So that's, it's a very important piece. And I think part of what Kwaku did is really kind of just disrespecting our platform and using it as fodder for basically entertainment.
So far from ex-Mormon gatekeepers censoring the truth, you're telling me that Kwaku, if he had a legitimate account, would be very welcome to come on and have an Ask Me Anything with just some very basic setup and preparation in advance.
The thing about Reddit is they're there for the conversation, right? The banter, the back and forth, and they would love to have an AMA with anyone who's coming on and saying, ask me anything. But it has to be done in a way that's legit, so people aren't afraid to be wasting their time talking to a dog or a cat pretending to be Kwaku. I mean, what I would say with ex-Mormon, this is where I was going to say I don't really understand what Midnight Mormons have, what it has to do with Mormonism, really. Richard Bushman has done an AMA at ex-Mormon. So
sure.
If Richard Bushman can come on to ex-Mormon, and it was a very respectful, it was actually a really productive conversation. If he can come on and have an AMA, what's the problem?
Yeah, well, speaking of which, we are having the Midnight Mormons coming on to this broadcast on February 19th. So perhaps I'll be able to ask them a few of those questions that you brought up that we were discussing right now. And
sure, have fun with it.
Yeah, for our listeners out there, that brings us to our Mormon News Roundup question of the week, which we always post these over to Anchor, who hosts our podcast. If you come on over to Anchor, you can interact with us on the Mormon News Roundup question of the week, which is, how do you feel about this week's Midnight Mormons Ask Me Anything Reddit drama? If you come on over to Anchor, you can interact with us on that. Now, our next article here is regarding the Brodie Awards, which we've covered before. It's time to vote for the 2022 Brodie Awards. And the Brodie Awards, what are the Brodie Awards, Chino?
Well, that was really, this is going back to that Bloggernacle, an era, a decade plus prior to Reddit and all of this, when blogging was kind of the thing. By common consent and some other blogs, they were really the Bloggernacle. And, the folks who run the Bloggernacle were very clear that people like me were not welcome to receive awards. They had something called the Niblets that was awarding, say, some of the best content that was produced during the year for the Bloggernacle. And the guys who had started by common consent came out very clearly and said, well, we don't Exmos like Shanson or Chino. The folks from Main Street Plaza was the blog the group blog that we were at. And it's very much an Exmo / atheist kind of hangout. But, we're pretty high level content.
But you've been nominated yourself. So for the Brodies, go over a number of different awards here. There's different categories. There's Best LDS Interest Site, Best LDS Website, a Best Podcast, Best LDS Interest Video Channel, Best LDS Interest Blog or Column. And then you've been nominated, Chino, for Best Redditor or Satire Subreddit. How do you feel about that?
That was really a joke entry, to be honest, because the whole point of that, if you look at that category, do you notice our horse?
Yeah.
So to actually have any of these categories be open for voting, you have to have at least 3 or 4 nominees, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just frankly, our horse is the most hilarious Reddit subreddit parody of the last few years. And so we had to throw some nominees in there just to have the voting going on. So I'm trying to remember who nominated me for that, but I'm not going to win. Our horse is running away with that one. And rightly so. Have you seen that subreddit?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's hilarious. Okay, so it's hilarious and it's a quick laugh out loud.
So it's mocking the idea of horses in the Book of Mormon with tapers. Is that the basic idea here? Or?
Basically, anyone who clicks over to our horse is just going to see thousands of posts of taper photos.
Okay.
And people wandering in, going, "I thought this was about horses."
And how did they manage to get that domain or that extension?
Well, that's the not so secret piece of Reddit that's kind of fun. Is it's not that hard to register these domains. For example, like American Prime. We're going to talk about American Primeval later, right? Well, I've gone ahead and just registered American Primeval, and eventually I'll get some guys who like moderating subreddits about TV series, and they'll come in and set up episode discussions and all of that. We did the same thing for Under the Banner, Mormon No More, any of these sort of Netflix or streaming series that come on with Mormon topics. I tend to hop in and grab that subreddit and then work with other guys who enjoy doing TV commentary to build up a little community where people can talk about the episodes. So on Reddit, just FYI, it's pretty easy. If you're interested in a certain area, you generally can search and see if that name's available and then just grab it for yourself. And it's a first come, first serve thing.
Yeah. Oh, that kind of reminds me that the church was one of the first ones to grab Mormon.org. It's kind of like a first come, first serve.
Yeah,
And
I
we
mean, church
covered.
news. I own church news on Reddit. Like nobody cares, but I mean, that's mine.
Interesting. I wonder who owns the Victory for Satan on Reddit. That's the one that really needs to be taken
Well,
care
we
of.
own that every day at our Mormon. Come on.
Yeah, you bet. Now, our next article here, you also posted this. You had a high number of, I follow your account very carefully on Reddit because you always have a lot of great kind of obscure news articles, which I find very interesting. And it's regarding Cora Evans. So Cora Evans is a bona fide ex-Mormon and quite soon may become a Catholic canonized saint. So she was born in 1904 in Utah. Of course, anyone born in Utah in 1904 is LDS for sure. At the age of 3, she experienced a mystical vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and eventually she got married in the Salt Lake Temple. Shortly after her wedding, she started doubting her faith, and in 1934, while lying sick in a bed, she heard a radio program called The Catholic Hour, and afterwards contacted her local Catholic priest. She met with them, and then eventually her entire family converted to Catholicism. And she's going to become a canonized saint. So instead of she's going to be leaving Latter-day Saint and becoming a canonized saint. I've never seen something like this take place.
I mean, in terms of the Catholic world, from what I gather, reading the articles about, I mean, she's a fairly big deal in terms of the mystical, that tradition of someone who had this experience and it becomes this spiritual edification for other Catholics. And I think that's what's driving her canonization is that, she's known for invigorating sort of this spirituality. That's not my world. I mean, the reason this story stood out for me was, and this is going back to Midnight Mormons, sort of one of their tags is, well, yeah, but ex-Mos are on the hook because where do people go after they leave the church? And I'm like, well, actually, there's this entire history going back to the Mormon Reformation in the 1850s in Utah. From that time all the way up to now, there are always Mormons who are leaving and going on their own journeys. The problem is you never really hear their stories. They're not told within the Mormon bubble. And this is, I mean, with Cora's story, it's just an example of, yeah, there are ex-Mormons who go on to lead all kinds of lives, experience all kinds of things. And I'm just fascinated to see her story. And I think there's so many others like that. I mean, if I were a Mormon studies scholar in 2023, I think my focus would be on ex-Mo erasure, all of these stories, particularly of women from the Mormon Reformation until now. What are the names and the stories of all of these women who left Mormonism and went on to do amazing things? There's actually so many of them, but they don't get told because they don't serve the purpose of any official narrative. There's no sort of institutional or cultural desire to hear these stories told. But as an academic, those are the stories I would be looking to get up, to dig up and retell because they're just really interesting.
Yeah, is she the first ex-Mormon to get canonized? I've never heard of, or Mormon of any kind. Is she the first Mormon/ex-Mormon in history to get canonized as a legitimate saint? As far as I know, yes.
I would guess. I mean, just in terms of the Mormonism has been around for a couple hundred years. I can't imagine there's any others. I haven't seen any.
Yeah, so for our listeners out there, we post all of our episodes on YouTube, and also we are on Twitter. We're at News Mormon. If you know of any Mormons or ex-Mormons who have actually been canonized as Catholic saints, would you drop us that information? Because I was not able to find it. So this is really a kind of an unprecedented article here. And that's why you're searching of the news. And this is on a very obscure website here. This is on alicia.org here. This was published on January 25th. These somewhat obscure news websites, you're never going to see this in the church news, that's for sure. But they have fascinating stories, which is why following Chino Blanco on Reddit is definitely worth your time. Anything else on this article here, Chino?
I'm curious to see. I mean, she's not canonized yet. I'm curious to see how that goes. I mean, at some point, if we need to sort of help this along, I'm sure Main Street Plaza with the Brodies, we can set up a nomination system and try to promote her canonization if that helps. That was a joke.
I don't know.
Ex-Mormon should be nominated for canonization this year?
I don't know if the Catholic Church will take that into consideration in their process. I'm not that familiar with the process, but I imagine that it does not involve anything having to do with Reddit.
It may be a little bit more serious than that.
That's right. Now, our next article here was from theguardian.com, and it's entitled Losing Their Religion While U.S. Churches Are on the Decline. And this was published on Sunday, the 22nd of January, 2023 by Adam Gavitt. And it says that people are breaking the habit of attending church during COVID, which had a really still far-reaching ramifications. A lot of churches are really having to work very hard to get even much less new converts, but trying to get back the people who used to be attending before COVID. They're still not able to reach their pre-COVID pre-COVID levels. And it shows a picture here of a Catholic church here where there's only like 4 parishioners inside. Part of the article also said that in 2017, Lifeway surveyed young adults aged between 18 and 22 who had attended church regularly for at least a year during high school. And the firm found that 7 out of 10 of them have now, as of just 5 years later, 7 out of 10 of them have stopped attending church regularly. What do you think is going on with the why U.S. churches are on the decline here, Chino?
Well, I mean, I spent probably the last 25 years mostly on planes and hotels and traveling. If you look at Asia and if you look at Europe and you look at the US is kind of unique in the sense that the whole secularization process hasn't really kicked in for long running cultural reasons. But I think that's what we're looking at in sort of the broader picture is just our culture, our society here is going to become more secular. The internet's certainly accelerating that in the US, I think. If you go to Our Atheism right now and you look at the top post there, it's mine. And it talks about finally younger women are leaving religion faster than younger men. And I think you have a whole cohort, this younger cohort that they are just heading for the exits as far as religion is concerned. I'm talking about Gen Z. This crop of kids who are in high school right now. I mean, there's there's a substantial percentage of young Mormon kids who I think by the time they're 18, they are going to be prepped to basically, hey, when I hit 18, I'm out. I'm moving on.
Yeah, I have a lot of anecdotal evidence for that in my own life. It talks about in this article in the pandemic, people who were weakly attached to their faith, all of a sudden you have months of not going and they're saying, well, we don't really need this. We didn't notice a difference in our life, either positive or negative. And some of them even actually noticed a positive change in their life. And they're saying, it's hard to, and parents are saying, it's hard to drag the kids along. And it's just, people are lax and, it's just.
And I think, there's a couple of things. First, if you look at sort of the reporting on this kind of thing over previous years, there was always this sense that, high demand religions like Mormonism, the more conservative traditions, they weren't losing members, right? Like they were able to hold on to their members as opposed to what we'd call the liberal, the Presbyterians and more of the mainline Protestant traditions, who were just bleeding membership. The Mormons are always like, oh yeah, but look at us, our tradition is different. We're somehow, running against that tide. That's not true anymore. These high demand religions are, and I think what you're speaking, this gets to this thing of what happened during the pandemic of people getting that time to step back. The thing I would comment on that, particularly where the LDS Church is concerned, is they had actually, when they rolled out this idea of home church, they could have done something with this home church idea, but as with so many of the initiatives during the Nelson administration, it's just sort of stated, but there's no program in place. It's almost like, we want to talk about home church, but we're not going to give you any of the materials or the tools to actually create home church. And it seems like a missed opportunity. And at this point, the horse is out of the barn, and I don't think these folks are coming back. And I don't think home church is ever going to become a thing. I don't know if that answers,
wasn't the Come Follow Me program was kind of a try at bolstering the home church, the Come Follow Me program.
You would know that better than I am. I do not have my finger on the pulse of what that lived experience of Mormonism is right now. I just read online. What you're saying is what I'm seeing anecdotally online. It's just that pandemic, that disconnect. All of a sudden, folks were like, "Yeah, you know what? What is this doing? And what is it doing in my life?" And I would just say, for someone who's a bit older, I just remember a Mormonism where we had road shows and Boy Scouts, and there scripture chase even. Stake dances. There was just this whole sort of and Wednesday nights were a fun time. So you had Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays that you're doing things at church that weren't just talking about bearing your testimony.
Yeah.
And it feels like the whole Mormon experience, from what I can gather, particularly under the Nelsons, is just, let's reduce it all down to like repeating our oaths of loyalty to this thing, as opposed to making the experience interesting and invigorating.
Yeah, and in fact, the church has also gotten rid of the pageants, in addition to the road shows, in addition to the Boy Scouts, in addition to a lot of the other things that really, gave people meaning or were very, even before the 3-hour block was instituted in 1980, church used to take place. The elders quorum was during the week. Primary was during the week. And only on Sunday did you come together for the big meeting in the sacrament. So it was a much larger part of your life. And it was much more, rich and diverse in experience than kind of the one size fits all cookie cutter approach that we have now. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, President Nelson, he took the unprecedented step of saying that in the second hour of church, that it will now begin with a prayer, when before it was not beginning with a prayer. So we're seeing a very centralized top-down approach that, doesn't resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is something, just in terms of my own personal interests, I'll just say I've never been that interested in what you'd call Mormon apologetics. I guess that's why I'm so confounded by what Midnight Mormons tries to do, which is it an apologetic debate? Endlessly discussing the theology to me is less interesting than the sociological aspects. I mean, to me, it's the sociology of what's happening. It's what, what are people getting out of their lived experience of being Mormons, and what's the institution doing to sort of promote, you know, an interesting lived experience, as opposed to these endless debates over things like Elijah and Elias. I mean, and this is, and you look at that RFM debate with Midnight Mormons, and I would have to say, like, and that's, I applaud what RFM and, those sort of, like, they're sort of the counter apologetics that come from the Exmo side. That's all fun. It's just not my world. It's not a world that I'll ever be that interested in. I'm much more interested in what you do in terms of just, hey, here's the headlines, here's what's happening, and a lot of, like, news reporting is more sociological. It's more, hey, this is something that was, Nelson announced that we're going to have these prayers before these meetings. Well, what does that actually even mean? How is that a news item? How is that contributing to the experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. We don't, I'm not really qualified to really get into all of the LDS truth claims. There's a lot of people this is a well-trod path that thousands and billions of electrons have really been burned up on it. And there's much smarter people than me who can talk about church history, church theology, and can debate endlessly debate, as you said, these church truth claims. Yeah, and then there's absolutely no resolution that comes to really, it still continues even today. So I'm much more interested in the headlines and the sociological aspect, as you said. And I think maybe that's why we are long lost kindred spirits. I'm just going to.
Well, I mean, halfway through my mission, I mean, one of the things that happened to me was I was like, I don't really care if the church is true at this point. I just want to know if it can do good. If I stop worrying about it being true, can I worry about it being good? And I was fortunate enough to be a branch president, and I felt like what we were doing in the programs that we were doing in our branch, I loved the experience of helping families and helping people come together on Sunday and have an experience that maybe help them have a better week, a place for them to bring their kids, and somebody's there to help them watch their kids so they can have an hour with adults and talk about, issues in their lives, learn a spiritual lesson, in addition to Saturdays having some sports, some dances, having all of, just creating, a healthy, wholesome environment for families. And that was, my frustration after that was I moved on from being branch president, and talking to some of the area authorities in Latin America. They were just still focused on baptisms and conversion and that aspect. And I was like, guys, it's about retention, and it's about using your networks networks you have with your families that are already members and building out from those so that you have strong wards and branches, not going out and getting random people from door knocking that burns out the local leadership because they're having to welcome 10 or 12 strangers every month into a branch. We're burning our people out. I mean, the whole system was just broken, but nobody in leadership wanted to listen to that because it's a top-down organization. They don't want to hear what some young, 20-year-old AP in Brazil has to say. They think they've got it figured out.
Yeah, and then the difficulty, the missionaries bring those converts into the ward house, and then the retention is basically put onto the membership, which obviously rises up to the top of that.
That was the key insight in Brazil, is that we had set up a system that structurally was pitting the missionaries against the local leadership.
Exactly.
Just burnout.
Yeah, because the local leadership actually has no ability to really stop a baptism because they're not involved with the baptismal process. The interviews for new converts are done by missionaries and or the mission presidency. And therefore, there was a lot of trepidation, in my mission from local congregations would say, are you sure that these folks are really ready? I mean, they've come to church one time. They seem, I don't know, a lot of new converts are, quite frankly, they are very flighty, and they're somewhat like a Martin Harris. They're a little bit fickle. They can jump from religion to religion. And that's why the retention is so poor. So there's just there's a lot of conflict in between that,
Yep. Preach it.
Yeah. Okay. So, hey, our next article here is I found very interesting, and it's from the church news itself, newsroom.churchofjesuschrist.org. And this was put out on the 23rd of January, 2023. And this was Anchorage, Alaska Temple to be reconstructed. Now, this is, and when they say reconstructed on this one, they mean really, really reconstructed, torn all the way down to the foundation, completely leveled, and moved to a different location on the same plot. So it's going to be in the same spot. Now, the new temple will be built at the same time. So the existing temple will be on the same plot. And in the meantime, across the parking lot, you will see a new temple that will be rising. So for a brief period of time, there will actually be two temples on the same plot. which is I think it's very interesting to me to see. I don't think we've ever seen something quite like this in the past. Now, this is only, from my understanding, this is only the third temple that will be completely rebuilt. We have the Nauvoo temple, which was, it was basically abandoned by most of the saints when Brigham White Branch went west, and it was abandoned like in 1845-ish, that time frame. Then it was eventually hit by a tornado a short time later, and then they just burned it down because they didn't want it to be turned up. They tried to sell the Nauvoo temple, but nobody really wanted it. They tried to sell it to the Catholic Church, but nobody really wanted the building. Anyway, it got burned down. So that temple had to be reconstructed. And the Samoa temple, I think back in the 90s, I want to say in the mid 90s, it caught fire and burned all the way to the ground. And they had to totally reconstruct that temple as well. So this is only the third temple, which is going to be completely reconstructed from the ground up. Now, this Anchorage Temple is only the second small Hinckley temple. So President Hinckley back in the 90s, he really pioneered the idea of these small temples, which are less than 10,000 square feet. And this is only the second one that was ever dedicated back in the 90s after the Monticello, Utah temple. Now, a couple of other things about this article, which I find interesting. So anytime that a small temple is built, there's always a stake center on the property as well for meetings and things of that nature. Whereas in the larger temple, you can actually hold the meetings inside the temple. Well, there's not enough room in these small temples for any meetings. So there's a stake center on the same property. That stake center is also going to be rebuilt because whenever the church rebuilds a temple, they always redo the stake center, no matter how new or old that stake center is. A couple of other notes here before I get any opinion you might have on this, Chino, is that the current temple, that small temple in Anchorage, it has 2 endowment rooms. And those are progressive endowment rooms, meaning that you move from one location in the temple to the other to complete your endowment. So the new temple, it's also going to have 2 rooms. However, the new rooms are going to be stationary. So that will essentially double the capacity of the temple. And so basically it's going to be, this is the first time from my understanding that a Hinckley small temple is going to be replaced with a more standardized sized temple, which is basically double the capacity. It'll have, cafeterias, more baptistry, larger changing rooms, and things along those lines. Any reaction to this Anchorage, Alaska temple to be reconstructed here, Chino?
I don't really know enough about the details of that to have a specific insight. I guess I'm always curious about who the contractors are, who the architects are for all of these projects. My guess would be that the church is relying on maybe vendors who are based more in the Southwest U.S. and so you end up with designs that aren't suitable to other geographies. That's just speculation.
Very well could be right about that. The thing about these small temples, they were somewhat standardized in their construction. I think that there's around 40 of these so-called Hinckley small temples. And the problem that a lot of them immediately started encountering problems. In fact, a number of them have been basically torn down all the way to basically like the studs, not to the foundation, but to the stud level, because they were susceptible to a mold infection and other architectural defects. In fact, I saw an article that there was a small Hinckley temple somewhere in the Southeast. I want to say it was in Georgia. I'm not sure about that, but that only 4 years after it opened, it had to be closed for renovations because of poor construction methodologies and mold issues. Yeah. So these smallish temples were supposed to save a lot of money, but in a lot of ways, it seems anecdotally that they have that they've cost a lot of money.
Anecdotally, that's what I see on Reddit are people from people who are in the Bible Belt, who are down south where it's a little more humid, talking about this phenomenon of the mold and all of that. So it sounds like something went wrong there. Just recently there was another news item. I think it's in the New Canaan, Connecticut area. There a new meeting house is going up, and there was some conflict with the local board as far as approving the design. And I just popped in to see like who the architects were, and sure enough, they're based out of Arizona. So you've got an Arizona-based crew going out to Connecticut trying to, get this design approved, which is orthogonal to what we're talking about. I probably the main thing for me that I'm curious as an Exmo is just if you've ever read Damon Smith's book called The Book of Mammon. It's a slog to get through, but the part that really the little piece that stood out to me was that he had worked in the church offices, and he had just mentioned there is a vendor and contractor database, and I think if there's anything like if you want to talk about a very proprietary piece of information in this world would be, well, who exactly are the vendors and the contractors that the church are using. And if you were to put the pieces together, my suspicion would be that that's very much an old boys network. It's very much, similar to the way general authorities, if you look at all the family relationships there, I would expect to see that emulated in their contractor network, that it's all a friends and family network. And so when these temples have to be renovated or torn down or whatever, nobody's really feeling any pain because that network is just benefiting. They're feeding at the trough, and there's certainly plenty of funding there. A few years earlier, people would have just speculated about, things like the Ensign Peak Advisors Fund. Well, we don't have to speculate anymore. We know the investments are there. We can see their portfolio. They're reporting quarterly on those, and it's one thing we can't see yet is who are they contracting? Who are they hiring to do all of this construction work? And when Nelson talks about 300, this whole thing of temple building, it just, to me, as an ex-Mormon, I just look at that sort of askance as, well, sure. If you've ever seen was it a Netflix series called Ozark? He's running these invoices through a legit construction firm, right? And that's just, I'm calling this in from Chicago, where this, this kind of thing is just infamous. We know how these projects work and who's getting paid and all of that. So, I don't want to, it's speculation on my part, but that's just from Damon's book. That's the piece that stood out, is just there is a vendor contractor database that I would love to get eyes on, just to see what that network of relationships is there.
Well, I'm sure that someday it will be made public.
Exactly.
Anything, there's the leaks that have come. Everything that we've learned really of substance about the church has come from leaks, and there's eventually going to be somebody who's high up in the construction management department at the church who leaks it, or they could be inadvertently leaked. So it's only going to be a matter of time until we know the answers, and which always begs the question, well, why not just if it's only a matter of time until we know everything, why not just get out in front of it and let everybody know everything now? It seems so much better to do it that way. Now, you talked about these temples running afoul of codes, and the Orem Temple, for instance, that was announced, I don't know, about 3 years ago. The Orem City Council tweeted out afterwards that the church made no coordination whatsoever with the Orem City Council, letting them know that there would be a giant temple right off the freeway in Orem, and Orem is not an anomaly. Here we have our next article here, which is in Heber, the church has announced a temple, and the church has applied to change the Wasatch County dark sky rules. So a lot of these temples are illuminated almost all the time, some of them even around the clock. And Heber Valley is a very provincial and somewhat of a quaint location. And so they have light ordinances that would prevent this temple from being illuminated in the way that the church wants. So they have gone ahead and petitioned to change the Wasatch County code, the outdoor lighting code, so that it can be illuminated and shined as much as the church wants. Any reaction to this article here, Chino?
I mean, that's just, to me, that feels true to form for the institutional church. That's disappointing. I think the logic behind dark sky rules is pretty obvious to most people. Asking for an exception to that, I feel, sends, it's the wrong message at the wrong time, but it's the least surprising piece of news this week, I would guess.
There's, Heber has very restrictive dark sky rules, but Salt Lake County and Davis County and things like that, they have very lenient rules so that the temples like Draper and Bountiful, they can be illuminated not just until 10 o'clock p.m. and starting up again at 5:30 a.m., but these temples are illuminated round the clock. And there was a Reddit post here that showed the brightness of the Bountiful Temple just a few days ago at 1:30 in the morning. It is illuminated at a level that is truly tremendous. It's like you could see it from the space station. They are really, really bright. Just a lot of light pollution that comes from these particular temples. And somebody, again, on Reddit made a joke that says, what do you get when you cross light pollution and secret doctrine? And the answer is spiritual cataracts. So that's a small joke there. Anything else on these temples and what's going on with temples this week here, Chino?
No, I mean, I think when you're talking about, I thought it was interesting when you mentioned sort of the conflict between, say, local boards, local zoning boards or what have you, and folks on the church payroll who are pushing these projects through. I mean, the complaint seems to go back to this sense of Mormon entitlement or LDS entitlement in these discussions, and it just reminds me of that whole fabricated Reddit brouhaha with Midnight Mormons. I mean, the whole problem was this sense of entitlement of coming in and saying like, oh, I don't need to know the rules, or the rules don't apply to me. I'm just going to show up and expect people to catch up with my, obliviousness. It feels kind of entitled. And in terms of the dark sky things, there's a kind of Mormon exceptionalism at play and the psychology there. If you're like, oh yeah, we want to encourage members to be good stewards, but at the same time, we're going to draw this exception, this bright exception for LDS temples.
Yeah, well, the church is such a huge kingpin in Utah that it knows that it's going to be able to, if it asks its members who are on the city councils of Wasatch County or of Orem, in Orem, that they're going to be able to change the rules in accordance to what the church wants. So they're the big kingpin in Utah. But it's kind of interesting because I think it was about a year and a half ago in California that the church had announced a new temple in, I'm sorry, I forget the location, but it had a large spire, and the California city council said, no, you can't have a 200-foot, I don't know if it was 200, yeah. You can't have a 100-foot tall spire that is going to dominate the landscape around here. No, you can't have that. Go back to the drawing board and send us something that's a little bit more reasonable. So, and the church had to conform, and now that temple has virtually no spire in order to conform to county code. So, when the church has the ability to have that entitlement to be the kingpin, it does what it wants. But then when it has to, when it has to come begging at the door of, the so-called Gentile city councils, it's kind of humbling. So, hey, our next article here is and you posted this, Chino. It's the Netflix American Primeval. Is it Primal or Primeval? Mormon Revenant.
Primeval, yeah.
So what's going on with that?
Well, it looks like, and this is something I think is just coming out of production, and there's not a lot of information yet. But just in terms of the blurbs that I've seen, it looks really interesting. I mean, it's playing into it looks a little bit different than the true crime genre. That there's so many examples of sort of Mormon themes in the true crime genre recently. This looks more like they're calling it the Mormon Revenant. This idea of this, this movement west, and then telling some of those stories, but from a different point of view, not from say a faithful point of view, but from the point of view of say the women who were along for that ride, and some of the violence involved in all of that. And I think I have not read, Jim Bridger, I think, had some conflict with Brigham Young. And I think there was like a conflict between Bridger and the Mormons generally on the frontier. And I think they're maybe exploring that a bit, just the conflict between, say, your Mormon settlers and the others who were on that frontier. The character's name is Abish. Is that how you say the one of the three unique Mormon names for women?
Now, I believe according to the pronunciation guide in the Book of Mormon, it's Abish, but the pronunciation guide in the Book of Mormon, in my opinion, means absolutely nothing because we don't really know how these names were supposed to have been. How do we know that they're supposed to be pronounced the way that they are? Joseph Smith said the words Moroni. He said the word Nephi. I really doubt that he ever said the word Abish. So the idea that we know how to pronounce these is kind of a fairy tale. But sorry, that's a tangent.
Well, that's okay. But I thought it was an interesting clue. I mean, if someone's if the writer is giving a character the name of Abish, somebody has done some homework.
Yeah, so in the series here, it's Sarah Leon will play Abish, a Mormon woman not content with being seen as the property of her husband, Jacob. Mm-hmm. So Jacob Pratt here, Dane DeHaan is going to portray Jacob Pratt. That's a good Mormon name, Pratt. He's going to be a Mormon leading his family across the frontier to join other settlers in Utah. And so this is going to be a 6-episode miniseries, which is described here, I've got the quote, as a raw, adventurous exploration of the birth of the American West. So do you think this is going to kind of be in the vein of Under the Banner of Heaven? Do you think it's going to have the same kind of play as Under the Banner of Heaven?
I mean, it sounds like it's more in the vein of Yellowstone or those kinds of things, right?
Right,
sort of like the neo-Western that as I was saying, I don't think it's the true crime genre. I think it's going more to this new Western, which I like Westerns, so I'm going to be watching it for sure. I'm definitely more of a Clint Eastwood guy than a true crimes guy on a personal level, so I'll be tuning in. They're going to try to tell this story in the way that the Revenant was told, which I love the Revenant.
So it's kind of like Yellowstone meets the Revenant meets Brigham Young.
Well, I was just going to say how there have been some really, really poorly made hit pieces. If you want to talk about what was the one that John Voight was in that was about Brigham Young and the move west and all of that. But anyway, it was just terrible. Like as an ex-Mormon, you're just embarrassed that someone would. It's similar. Some of these hit pieces in terms of some of the earlier efforts. As an ex-Mormon, was like, the only time I get defensive of the Mormon culture or the LDS Church institutionally is when these sort of evangelical Christian attacks.
I just looked that up. September Dawn.
Oh, September Dawn. Yeah, it's terrible, right? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's like a 16% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So hopefully we're going to get something
a little bit better than that. This is like a little higher quality piece of content than that. So.
Yeah, it should be really good. And that does, you also posted something about how, is this going to feed into the media depictions of Mormons? That is the tropes. Is this going to feed into the tropes, or will this run counterculture to the tropes? Is this series going to be an example of othering, or is it going to be more inclusive? What is your take?
Whenever anything like this is announced, I'm sure that the usual suspects are sharpening their pencils to write another piece about, oh, this is, religious bigotry is alive and well in the U.S. and the Mormons are the only ones who are sort of allowed to be pilloried in this way, and I don't think that that's what's happening. I think what's happening is that you have a lot of untold stories particularly because if you look at the official LDS narrative during that period, its focus is so singular that you really lose sight of the stories of the ex-Mormons, or the ones who left the church, or the women who, like, what was the actual lived experience for women who were not on board with the program after a couple of years of experiencing polygamy or the move west or any of this. Are their stories allowed to be told? Is it bigotry to explore those stories? Come on. I mean, that's what I'm waiting for. James Fallows and the Atlantic have a long-standing, great relationship with the Mormons, with the LDS Church, and guys that I respect. But the idea of trying to frame, cultural critiques as bigotry, it fell flat when McKay Coppins tried to do it, and I expect there's going to be other attempts that are going to fall flat as well.
It seems like one of the only genres that really gets a lot of eyeballs when it comes to Mormon media is true crime. We had Mark Hoffman's story last year. We had Under the Banner of Heaven. And that's what I wonder, is this going to be in the same mold as the things that seem to have a lot of eyeballs?
I don't think so. I mean, if you look at that, I mean, that genre is kind of, and there's more. I mean, a Friend of the Family was on Peacock. I mean, it just goes on and on if you want to start exploring this. I mean, I think the Lori Vallow case is going to drive, Sins of My Mother, I think was
yes, Sins of My Mother. That's right.
Yeah, and you look at the pushback I would give in some of the criticism of how Mormonism is exploited for the true crime genre is that these things actually happened. Lori and Chad, they're real. If you look at southern Utah, some of these small towns, the culture in some of those small towns is real. Nobody's inventing the sort of pressure cooker, patriarchal sort of sometimes batshit insane culture that exists in the rural parts of the Mormon corridor.
Yeah, Lori Vallow, her thing is going to go to trial. Her case is going to go to trial this year. And that is going to be a huge Mormon media event. That is going to be a feeding frenzy, because it really is going to combine everything that the media loves about Mormons. They're strange. Right. They're dangerous. Uh-huh. They're psychopathic. This is going to be a feeding frenzy, and all the sides, are going to be lined up, ready to, with the knives sharpened. It's going to be fascinating. I cannot wait until this trial kicks off for the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
I think it'd be a good opportunity. I mean, I'm fine with those who want to draw finer distinctions between what Chad and Lori were involved in and say like the mainstream theology or the mainstream church. I think that's has to be done. I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, that's a distinction that the media is typically not very good at doing. As I personally believe in Under the Banner of Heaven, it didn't do that good of a job of really having a distinction between people who are very closely affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and those who are not. So we'll just have to see. But that's not the only Mormon media event that hit the news this week. And that's the Christian series. This is season 3 of The Chosen. It's in full swing here. And this is Dallas Jenkins' masterpiece, which is showing the life of Jesus and his disciples. And there's still more controversy is swirling around the show's creator and his alleged flirtations with Mormonism. And Dallas Jenkins, in the article, he referred to Mormons as his brothers and sisters and noted that we all love the same Jesus. Pardon me, Chino, this is a controversial statement. Help me out here.
Well, in terms of from the Christian perspective, particularly the kind of perspective that would be the audience for The Chosen, the theological differences are real. Their view of Jesus theologically is different from the theological view that Mormons hold. I'm a bystander in all of this in the sense that this would be a drama that I have no dog in that fight. it's just interesting, and it's kind of inevitable. I mean, they produced The Chosen in Utah, right? I mean,
yeah, at the Motion Picture Studio South, which is down there by it's just south of Payson. They have a huge complex that's built up there so that they can shoot all of the church movies, and they have a rather large size village there, which can be conveniently used for either depictions in Palestine or depictions in Zarahemla. It's kind of a one size fits all sort of thing. And yes, The Chosen was shot there, and for a lot of evangelicals, anything having to do with BYU or Mormonism at all, that's a big problem. It's kind of funny, Chino. I went and Googled Dallas Jenkins, and I said, "Is Dallas Jenkins?" And then Google will fill in the, possible. It'll fill in the suggestions on what people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the prompt. And guess what the number one prompt is? Is Dallas Jenkins a Mormon? So people are very confused about the evangelicals. Speaking of dogs, you said that when he says that we love the same Jesus, that's kind of a dog whistle for evangelicals because they don't think that Mormons and evangelicals worship the same Jesus. So there's always controversy around this.
I would say the one thing that I maybe have a little bit of personal take on this is that I didn't grow up in Utah. Moving to Utah to BYU was moving to a new place for us. I mean, I grew up in the Bible Belt. For those of us who are like from the South or in the Bible Belt, they're very aware that Mormonism is on the agenda as far as the anti-cult. We have fire in Mormonism. You have these sort of like growing up, we had firesides where you would get sort of like minor Mormon celebrities would come through and do a fireside for the youth, right? And just have some fun with that. I mean, the equivalent of that on the evangelical side in a non-denominational church is they'll have guys come through and do a presentation on why Mormonism is a cult. There's a circuit for that. There are guys who that's their bread and butter, is putting on these presentations to these congregations. So it's very much, if you're from the Bible Belt, you've grown up hearing about how and being given the reasons why theologically Mormonism is a cult and why the Jesus is different. I think that's why it takes Mormons in the Mormon corridor. They may be a little bit shocked by that because they don't understand that's actually happening. Like, that's a reality that's happening. That's all these evangelicals, they were raised being taught this. It would be just like Mormons who were raised reading Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon Doctrine. We're very aware of what's said in that book. It would be very surprising if anyone outside of Mormonism were to flip through that and read some of those nuggets.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think back to the Godmakers, Ed Decker, Dave Hunt, they basically made a cottage industry of going around showing their movie to evangelical congregations and then selling their books afterwards. And that's where you get Jeremiah Films from, by the way, as well. So, yeah, I mean, that industry. You also have the Mormonism Research Ministry, which still does that today, and a lot of other organizations which really line up on this. So, yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
I would like to see the Mormons and the Christians have more. I mean, this is a conversation for them to have. It's got nothing to do with anything I'm interested in, but certainly the more that they can talk, I mean, that kind of collaboration for The Chosen in Utah and all of that, and the conversation, because they need to have the conversation at some point. Otherwise, you're going to have another couple decades of Christians calling Mormons cultists and Mormons being surprised that Christians don't accept their view of Jesus theologically. Be better if they just have that talk, sit down and talk it out.
Well, the church is really loath to really partner with a lot of other religions in some of these religious councils and other types of events like that. They're really not a part of any other, the Baptists have a big convention that they participate in, and a lot of different churches who have lots of different theological difference, they get together and try to, they try to worship God in their own way. The church does not really want to be a part of any other religious organization that I'm aware of. And that there certainly does the church no favors in building bridges to evangelicals or anybody else for that matter. And we covered also that, for instance, the Queen Elizabeth died this last year. In every single faith tradition in the entire world, from the Sikhs to the Buddhists to the Hindus to the Salvation Army to every single Christian denomination, sent a lot of times their number one representative or somebody who is in the church hierarchy for that particular funeral. And the church didn't send, not only did Russell M. Nelson not go, the church didn't even send a representative for something as seemingly banal as the Queen's passing. The church does not want to be a part of other religions because the church really holds itself apart from all other religions and says, we're not like you, we are special. So that makes it difficult to really, be brothers and sisters under heaven, shall I say.
It's interesting. One of the, just circling back to one of the earlier themes. This is getting back to Midnight Mormons, unfortunately. But this whole idea of where do ex-Mormons go? Where do people go when they leave the church? I mean, one of the best kept secrets is that, I don't know today in 2023 if it's the case, but over the last few decades, the traffic between the Southern Baptist Convention and Mormonism, that's where a lot of ex-Mormons were going. They were going to the Southern Baptists. I live on Reddit, so there's a certain, self-selected group that we imagine ex-Mormons being just like everyone who's on Reddit. But the reality is there's a huge chunk of former Mormons who are attending church with the Southern Baptists now.
Yeah, we've had a couple of people on the Mormon News Roundup who were once members of the church are now evangelical Christians. So, I mean, it's more common than I think a lot of people really realize.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Now, we have a couple of legislative items to get through here. We have two legislative articles here that have come up in the news. And the first one was from High Country News, which was published just a short time ago. And the title of the article is LDS Environmentalists Want Their Institution to Address the Great Salt Lake's Collapse. So, I mean, in the article, they're saying that the church, it owns 5,000 acres in and around the Great Salt Lake area. And that, Mormons want the church leadership to address current environmental crises. And the Great Salt Lake shrinking up is a really big deal, and it doesn't seem like very much is being done from 50 East North Temple to combat this really existential crisis. It makes me wonder, Chino, if only we had Moses around, because he was pretty good with seas. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's hard because I don't know. I don't have the chops to speak intelligently to what solutions might be. I mean, I come from more of the Edward Abbey desert solitaire sort of mindset, where I'm not even sure that we should be supporting the levels of population that we see in the Intermountain West with our kids. I mean, they know that I'm just like, this is just in the world globally, that this piece of the planet is so amazing. And we're building this infrastructure, and all these people are living in places that I'm not entirely sure that that's really what we should be doing.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. I do remember, I think back in the Bible about Elijah in the Bible, he controlled the rain in his land for 2 years. In fact, he prayed to heaven, and he sealed up the heavens so that no rain would fall for 2 years, had a drought, and he also caused that no dew would be put on the ground. And I was just thinking to myself, well, can't we kind of just do the opposite and, have the president of the church pray to God and, turn on the faucets of heaven?
Well, I don't want to turn on my Expo faucet. But if you go onto YouTube and you look, I mean, Ballard,
absolutely,
Elder Ballard, years ago had just made, in my mind, an outlandish claim that he was in Africa on some trip and that they prayed for rain, and when they came out, it was raining. And
yes,
that offends me. I mean, that offends me. The idea that somehow, God is going to, create these microclimates for 10 minutes on a particular day.
And it's not just the Elder Ballard with the controlling the rain. When he went to Bolivia back in a few years prior, he also gave his apostolic blessing in flood-stricken Bolivia as well. So he has made a number of claims of being able to control the weather. And it just seems like this would be a prime time to do so. The thing about it is that Elijah, he came to, according to, I forget what section of it is in the Doctrine and Covenants now, but he came to visit Joseph Smith in the Kirtland Temple to give him the keys. In fact, not only did Elijah come, but Elijah and Elias came. We really got a 2-for-1 in that situation. You would think that would be double the power. And those keys and power are still retained by the president of the church today. This seems like a great time to use it.
If they've mastered the quantum mechanics of making that happen back in Kirtland, you would think they'd be able to master the technology necessary to refill the Great Salt Lake.
One would imagine. Now we read in the Bible that Adam and Eve, they were supposed to, and in the Temple Endowment movie, they were given dominion over the fish of the sea, the flocks of the air, etc. And I just wonder, what does being a good steward of the earth look like from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints perspective? Now, I do have a very pricey solution here for you, Chino. It is a simple solution, but it is pricey, and that's to build a pipeline from the Pacific Ocean to refill the Great Salt Lake. Now, the salinity will be slightly different, but it'll still all work out. It will be very well. It'll actually work out perfectly. If you refill the Great Salt Lake to its maximum level, then when it evaporates, that evaporation will then go into the Colorado River, a tributary watershed, and it will refill Las Vegas, Fort Lake Powell, Lake Mead, all the way down to California. All of those situations that you talked about where people probably shouldn't be living. My brother lives in Las Vegas, for instance. It's really not a great place for people. But if you were to refill the Great Salt Lake, it would have a dramatic impact on the entire Colorado River watershed. And that can easily be done. The only cost is it costs about $10 million a mile to build a pipeline like that to pump that water. So it's about 2,000 miles. So it would cost about $2 billion. Does the church have that kind of cash on hand, Chino?
If the stock filings are to be believed, which I think they are, you would think so.
Absolutely.
It seems like it'd just be shifting something from one column to the other, maybe move some of that Tesla investment over into something else.
Yeah, it owns $1 billion in three different. It owns $1 billion of stock in three different companies, according to the Ensign Peak disclosures. It owns $1 billion in three different companies. I think it's GE, it might be Tesla, and Apple stock. Let's just liquidate those, build this pipeline, and fix the problem that really the Mormons themselves were really the ones who caused this problem of moving out there. So if we caused the problem, let's just go ahead and fix it. It's a simple solution. Rather expensive, and maybe even the state of Utah could chip in some dollars. I do have a very simple solution for that. Let me just, I was looking this up this week, and there was an article here by Stephen Snow of the 70 in 2018 who talked about the moral imperative of environmental stewardship. And he said that climate change is real, and it's our responsibility as stewards to do what we can to limit the damage done to God's creation. And I just think, well, what has the church done to limit the damage done to God's creation? Well, the only thing that I can really think of is in June of 2022, the church released a statement encouraging water conservation, saying that it was going to turn off during this drought in Utah the watering to the lawns and to the temples and things like that, which seemed like a really good step forward in being good stewards. The only problem is that Axios later, about 6 months later, went and surveyed those chapels in the Salt Lake and Utah areas, and it turns out that almost none of them had the water turned off, and only one temple went brown. The church has said that we should be good stewards. It has the capability of doing it. It's tried to make steps forward and going brown, but it hasn't delivered in anything related to climate.
That may be related to sort of what the demographics are of the core membership in the West in the church. I don't know. I'm not there, so I don't know how much resistance there is to trying to make progress on this issue. My sense, just watching Utah politics from the outside, is that there are a huge number of bad takes. Like, it just seems like it's just a relentless parade of bad takes as far as solutions for this go in terms of what's being discussed locally. I mean, the pipeline thing, I wouldn't, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm always, I look back and I think, if you think about the Civil Conservation Corps, if you think about some of the sort of the moments in U.S. history where we animated the population, got people excited about this idea of going out and doing big, bold projects, I don't know that I don't see any political will on that level in 2023 in Utah. All I see in Utah in 2023 is you try to drive through St. George and the traffic is worse than Chicago.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that what you said is right about the appetite being very low for this. And one of the reasons is that the church really has an apocalyptic mindset, meaning that Jesus is always supposed to be coming very soon. Joseph Smith said it, Lorenzo Snow says it, and it's still echoed today. If Jesus is coming soon for the second coming, then there's really no impetus or reason to take care of our planet and be good stewards, because the world is going to be ending. That's the problem with being good stewards. If you have an apocalyptic mindset, those two things are totally antagonistic. What was the church's number one legislative priority last year? It definitely wasn't climate change. What do you think that it was, Chino?
Oh, are you talking about the dog and pony show around marriage equality?
Yes, the Marriage for All Act. Yes,
right.
The marriage and so-called gay rights.
Uh-huh.
That is the church's legislative priority, and what they put all of their focus and things like that into, not climate change. There's also another article here. This is only this isn't the only article that is legislative, and that's 5 bills that were Utah lawmakers have brought up in this last session here. This was posted on January 17th, 2023 by ABC.com. There's a new bill that's been introduced in Utah from Angela Romero's bill, HB 115. And what is that bill going to do, Chino?
Well, I mean, that would simply be striking language from an existing clause that exempts clergy from reporting.
Right. Yeah. Remove that. So clergy in Utah, if someone comes into a clergy in Utah, confesses that they've had child abuse or that they're currently engaged in child abuse and or neglect of the members of their own family or someone else, if you report that to your bishop under current Utah law, that bishop is in no way, shape, or form required to report that to law enforcement. HB 115 is going to remove that exemption and say that clergy members will be just like social workers, counselors, teachers, and members of law enforcement, that you will be required to report that to law enforcement if you have credible allegations or a confession of child abuse. What do you think is going to happen with this bill, Chino?
Well, I mean, I think it's actually a fairly modest proposal in terms of what it does. It's simply striking language. It's probably DOA in terms of where it's going to go. And I think that the giveaway there is that and that's part of why I posted this link. I mean, it was the only news coverage I'd seen about the bill. And I know that just anecdotally on the ex-Mormon Reddit, people were asking, like, what can we do, to sort of front and center to help foreground, improvements in clergy reporting of child sexual abuse. And I said, well, you can look at this bill. Unfortunately, I'm not optimistic that that's actually going to work. I mean, normally I'd be like, yeah, write your representative, let them know that you support this bill. I don't think there's anything any of us could do to see this get passage.
Yeah, what this does, it's interesting if you look at the language. It does give an interesting carve out here for what I think is the Catholic Church priest penitent privilege, which I think is a big difference from a Mormon bishop's penitent privilege. It says if a clergy member is bound to confidentiality due to church doctrine or practice, they would not be required to report the abuse. So this particular bill seems to be aimed at Mormon bishops in particular, while exempting Catholic priests from reporting requirements. So it's a very fine-tuned piece of legislation.
And I think, if you get to the finer points of how the Catholic clergy penitent relationship works and how it works in a Mormon context, there are substantial differences. They don't get discussed because people's eyes would glaze over trying to get into those distinctions in terms of like, the public would not be interested in those. But in reality, there are some real differences between how that works.
Huge differences. For instance, the disciplinary councils where a bishop is telling other members of the stake high council your alleged crimes. So that does not happen in a Catholic confessional. So yeah, there's a big difference.
You tell me how secret things remain at the local level in the Mormon church and culture when anything like this. And, institutionally, the church operates on this idea of councils and committees. And so there's a lot of information sharing that goes around.
Yeah, especially at ward councils. I've had things that are brought up that seem to be somewhat confidential that were brought up in ward councils and or priesthood executive council meetings. So a lot of councils and a lot of things that are just really, they're not confidential in the same way that they are in a Catholic church. Therefore, I think this bill is saying that why are Mormon bishops given this priest penitent privilege when they don't really exercise it in any meaningful way anyway?
Right.
But I mean, it's more likely, definitely, it's probably dead on arrival. It might be more likely to be passed in a blue state. I think, it's probably not going to get passed because the Utah legislature is an astonishing 85% LDS. So unless the church gets behind this, which I really don't see doing, I don't think anything is going to happen with this bill. And that does bring us to our final news article of the week here. And it's kind of a stretch to call this a news article, but hey, we combed the web for absolutely the best Mormon-related content here. And this was just posted here a couple of days ago by the B9921hits.com. So
what is this?
This is the best LDS pickup lines have finally been revealed here, and this is from a program that is very, very funny here. That's in southern Utah. I believe it's in St. George, and they have a radio program that kind of takes a humorous look at LDS culture and antics, and it is 10 cringeworthy pickup lines that only LDS people will understand. And if you come on over to Anchor, you can interact with us on what we call the Mormon News Roundup Poll of the Week. And what is the poll of the week this week here, Chino?
Well, what is your favorite LDS pickup line, right?
Absolutely. That's the poll of the week. So if you come on over to Anchor, you can take our poll and you can help us out on this. I did run this past my wife, so she's going to be able to, I'll tell you her results at the end, but let's see if you can help me out on this here, Chino. What is selection number one?
Well, I'm glad you ran it by your wife, because when I hear lists like these, I get worried I'm going to disavow that I actually said these out loud at some point. So I've got some cover. I got some cover there. Okay. Number one, is your name Ammon? Because you are disarming.
Okay, so Ammon, this is from the Book of Mormon, because Ammon, he went to King Lamoni to guard the sheep, and then he cut off all the Lamanites' arms, right? So disarming is because he sliced off the people's arms, right?
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah. And that reminds me, by the way, I'm just thinking back to Royal Skousen, that BYU professor who probably knows more about the Book of Mormon than anything. He said that he had a testimony of the Book of Mormon, not just of its that it was true, but that it was historical. And in particular, he had a testimony that the Lord had revealed to him that Ammon was a real historical figure who really did cut people's arms off. So that is a very specific testimony, Chino. So maybe this is right up Royal Skousen's alley. That's a level of specificity for a testimony that I am very impressed by. I'm just going to put it that way.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, so Are we going to do a pickup line about historicity?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Back in the day, you used to just pray about the Book of Mormon to see if it was true. Now you actually have to pray and see if all of the figures individually are historical or not. So, I mean, we're taking this up to another level here. Okay, so that was a divergence. What is the number 2 LDS pickup line here?
All right. What's a celestial girl like you doing in a celestial place like this?
Oh, wait, is that, Chino, is that sexist or not? Is that a sexist?
Well,
is that
I gotta say,
not?
like, just the whole idea of pickup lines generally, this is all for fun and games, right? I would never recommend that, I would never have any of our kids, like, actually, go out and try to use a pickup line. Just, I think what's happened culturally is that it's also, what's the red pill thing or whatever?
The red pill, blue pill from the Matrix?
I don't know. I'm too old to have my finger on that pulse, but it seems like there was this thing on online and on Reddit. One of the more toxic sort of features of the online world is this idea of approaching, pickups as this sort of gamesmanship, like really honing, thankfully, I don't think any of these pickup lines would actually work in real life. So we're safe there. We've got the caveat that these are actually probably absolutely useless to actually working as a pickup line. I'm not familiar enough with it, but that's certainly something that is out there.
I don't think that these pickup lines are going to work for me. I don't know if they'll work for our listeners.
Well, wait a second. But I'm seeing number 3 here. You had some qualms about Under the Banner of Heaven, right?
Okay, what is number 3 then?
Do you hold the priesthood? Would you like to?
Oh boy,
I thought that's kind of gross. But I thought that got incorporated into a scene in Under the Banner.
Oh, did it? I don't remember that one.
Yeah.
I can't remember that one, but the number 4 one was my wife's favorite one. I'm not saying that my wife approves these. I'm not saying I approve these pickup lines. We're just reporting the news, Chino. We're not endorsing the news.
No, you're making news now, though. We're making news now.
Okay. What about number 4?
You want me to read that? Okay. My body is a temple, and your smile is the recommend.
If that was all that it took, I tell you, I would be going into the temple a lot more often if that's all I needed. My personal favorite is number 5, so maybe you can share that one.
Oh, okay. I was reading in the book of Numbers, and I realized I didn't have yours.
See, I like that because that shows that you're a devoted and devout person. It's just for me, that's my favorite because I'm kind of an obscure person like that. Now, only a Latter-day Saint definitely will get number 6. What is it?
I had to shake your hand to see if you were an angel.
Okay, now if you're not a Mormon, you probably don't get that joke, but what is the joke that goes behind that?
That was the operating instructions from way back in the day, right? Like the way to tell the difference between, you'd be able to explain this better than me at this point, probably. But yeah, there's definitely this whole Mormon lore that comes from, I think, the early years, right? Was it Joseph Smith?
Yes, it was Joseph Smith in the Doctrine and Covenants. He tells how he said how to be able to tell the difference between different types of angels, and that was basically if you shake hands with an angel, it's a good angel. If you shake hands with the angel, but your hand passes through, it's a bad angel. And if you ask to shake hands with the angel, but the angel doesn't raise his hand up, then he's a good angel. So we do have a very, very good test for how to tell angelic messengers. I've never had the opportunity to test it out, but yeah, that's where the joke comes from number 6.
Okay.
But which of course, by the way, there's only a certain amount of scriptures that are in the canon. There's only a certain amount of words and a certain amount of space. And I just wonder that the Lord of all creation is going to tell us a very obscure test for angelic ministrations. But, maybe he could have just said something as simple as boil your water. I don't know. There's only a certain amount of words that you have. It just seems like that was a little bit of a waste. But hey, what do I know? Maybe I haven't dealt with as many angels as I should have. Our final poll of the week here, favorite LDS pickup line is number 7. You work out because it looks like you nourish and strengthen your body. Oh my gosh! Yeah, is that sexist or is that a good pickup line? Is it good or is it not? Is it a good pickup line? Well, I mean, maybe I've been conditioned by too many years on Reddit, but like if a woman posts, if a woman posts a selfie on RX Mormon, for example, right? You would want to be very careful about making drive-by comments about her physical appearance, and for good reason, right? I mean, we live in a world where, rightfully so, we've learned that you have to be very aware of how that would be perceived when you're commenting on someone's personal appearance. I mean, I'm still a little bit shook from number 5, so I'm having to recover from that. If I met someone who had been reading the Old Testament, asking for my number, I would have been. I don't know that I want to have a relationship with someone who spends time reading the Old Testament. Actually, I mean, no, that just kind of scares me. Yeah, I've been reading in the Book of Numbers, and I realized I didn't have yours. You need to question somebody's sanity to spend too much time in Numbers in the Old Testament. Really? Okay. I mean, number 6. Now I'm just thinking back. I mean, actually, if you're going to have the Midnight Mormons on, maybe use this one on them. Like, look, guys, you're Mormon, right? You have your whole test about you've got to shake the hand to make sure the angel is actually an angel, right? Yeah. Well, there's a way to do an AMA on Reddit too. A little process, a few little tricks that you can use just like that. So, you got your tips on how to sort between angels and non-angels. Here's some tips on how to sort between trolls and actual people when you're doing an AMA. Just saying. Okay. I will pass it. I will pass
that
on that.
on.
I will pass that wise counsel on. So if I had to pin you down here, Chino, what is now the legend has it, by the way, that Joseph Smith himself may have come up with these. I can't confirm that as a certainty, or maybe at least Heber C. Kimball, not sure. But what is your favorite LDS pickup line? Can you start the ball rolling for our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week, which of course we do not take too seriously?
Yeah, I'm going to go with number one. I'm going to go with Ammon.
Okay. Is your name Ammon because you're disarming?
Yeah.
Okay, you like that? Okay, I'm gonna have to try that out this week, see if it works. I'm not sure. I can't tell you if it's gonna work for me. It may work for our listeners out there, but we appreciate you taking.
Hey, would that be your wife using that line? I mean, the reason I chose it because I think this would be your wife using that line, right?
Oh, wait a minute. So that's
think this through. Think this through. This is a gal using this as a pickup line, right?
Whoa! Oh, okay. So there's some male-focused ones. There's some female-focused. Oh, I get.
See, I'm saying that's why I went straight for the. Look, number one, the gals are out using pickup lines as well, right? So
okay, all right. I'm a little bit out of the pickup line game, as you can tell. I'm a little bit off of my game. I need to brush up on that, but I'll ask my wife to try that out on somebody and see how it works. Okay, so no problem. Well, Chino, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Mormon News Roundup this week. Really appreciate it. I do want to announce real quick here that we have some huge guests and shows coming up. We have Landon Brophy from the Good Book Club next week. We have the Alternative Mormon and Rebecca Biblioteca on February 12th. We have the Midnight Mormons who have confirmed that they are coming on February 19th. That is a date that will live in infamy. And we have the White Cat Prophecy on February 26th. Chino, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, it's been a blast. Thank you. And I hope we see you around to our Mormon a little bit more.
You bet. I'm gonna message those mods, see if I get my account back up and going.
Please do. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Now, a shout out this week to Weird Alma for this episode's music, and thanks so much for ruminating with us on the Great and Spacious Beehive. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So long.
Hey there, brothers and sisters. Thanks for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. And if you are enjoying this show, please consider making a donation. Patreon makes an important contribution to helping us ruminate on the Great and Spacious Beehive here. So thanks so much to everyone for supporting us on patreon.com. A big thank you to our sponsor, Signature Books, for supporting us here at the Mormon News Roundup. Please go over to signaturebooks.com and check out some of the latest publications that they have. Currently, they have things like Lighthouse, the Gerald and Sandra Tanner story by Ronald V. Huggins, one of the stories about the two most famous critics of Mormonism today. We've also got the story of Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon, a biography, suffragist, senator, and plural wife. That one is by Constance Lieber. And then we've also got a really good one here called DNA Mormon by Benjamin E. Park. So for all of your interests in Mormon studies and research, go over to signaturebooks.com and support our sponsor. Thank you.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.